we'll do that. We're going to get Regina in here, and she'll be able to talk. It's going to be around ethics themed, so we'll try to turn it in there and see what happens, and hopefully get it approved for ethics topic and get a full amount of credits for today. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened to Dr. Lozano. She's in a no-show. Called her, no response. Emailed, no response. I don't know what happened. Hopefully she's okay. But we will get Regina Quinn up here as soon as possible to fulfill that 1 hour talk, and we'll see what happens. So again, it will be considered a full talk with ethics. I just have to send that PowerPoint to our board to get it approved. But of course, that takes a couple of weeks to get it approved, so that's why the delay and getting your credits back to you. So just hang tight. I'll get Regina Quinn up here ASAP.
Hello. Okay, so I'm your fill-in-the-blank speaker here. I'm a mother of 6. I know how to get attention. Okay, so I'm the fill-in-the-blank speaker here. My name is Virginia Quinn. My title with Adult Protective Services is, get this, I can't get it all on a card in one line. My title is EDI-SME. That stands for Evidence-Driven Investigations Subject Matter Expert. They keep changing my title every so often, hoping that, well, this will make her leave. They just keep sticking in there. Anyway, so a little bit about me. I am a retired cop. I was a captain with the Sheriff's Office in Houston. And then I came up the stairs. And then I came to the city of San Antonio. And I was the municipal integrity manager over there. And now I'm with the state, so I'm helping with investigations here. So I'm kind of going to tailor this as far as ethics in adult protective services, okay? Like everybody else in the world, we have to deal ethically with our clients, right? So we're going to start with the piece. Anyway, so one of the pieces, of course, that we have to do is that when we're dealing with clients who are limited English proficiency, okay? And that can mean a host of things for APS investigators, right? It can mean that they're limited English proficiency as far as knowing another language. It can mean that they can't speak, or that they have disabilities that disallow speech, okay? It can mean that they can't hear. And so it can mean a lot of different things for us. So I'm just going to show you what our policy is. Oh, hey, come in. Of course, the mission and vision of APS is to protect older people and people with disabilities from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And that is our motto, protecting with purpose, passion, and persistence, the 3 Ps. So this is our ethics on limited English proficiency. Under the Texas Human Resources Code, Title II, it grants specific rights to adult protective services clients, right? And it says that they have the right to refuse our protective services unless abuse or neglect presents a threat to life. And then we go to our lawyer. And so we have things that we can do if we really feel like their life is endangered. And they're not allowing us to help, or there is a barrier for us to helping them. And there's a lack of capacity to consent to protective services. So if that happens, then we kind of have to do Plan B. Okay, and so we have the opportunity to do what they call an EOPS, that's an emergency order of protective services. And from time to time we have to enact that. Not very often. Not very often. Not very often. I mean a small percentage of our clients. And that's only if we really feel like they're in a real situation of danger to themselves and that they really, they need our help urgently. They have a right to participate in and be consulted on all the decisions concerning their welfare if they're able to do so, if they're able to, consent. They have the right to select the least restrictive of the alternatives available for meeting their needs. And that's what we always want to do. You probably know, when you're dealing with elderly and disabled person, if you really want to scare them, start talking about a nursing home. Yeah, right? If you really want to scare them, you start talking about nursing home. And so Really, nursing homes, they have their place. We all know that. They're a vital part of the community. However, our job is to make sure that we do everything short of, putting them in the most restrictive setting. We have the least restrictive alternatives, okay? The LRAs is what we call them, right? Because we want to impose the least restrictive alternatives that's going to make them safe, okay? So that they can continue and be safe in their situation. So, they have the right to refuse medical treatment. If they have, capacity, they have the right to refuse medical treatment, even if we determine that the lack of capacity to consent to protective services, if the medical services conflict with their religious beliefs and practices. Okay? So that very rarely ever happens. They have a right to have a court-appointed attorney ad litem to represent their interests in any EOPS, in emergency order protective services. Okay? So we also have another rule for interpreter services for principals with limited English proficiency. So we have contracts. So that's what happens when our caseworkers go out and they're face-to-face with someone who doesn't understand them, they don't speak the language. We have a contract that we can get on the phone with an interpreter. We also have employees who receive incentive pay for their language services. And so, it's possible that they could also be joined in that kind of way as well. So we want to try to make sure that we're understood that we can reach that population, right? So, just some statistics on that. 2.1 million Americans are victims of elder abuse, neglect, or exploitation. And this was in 2012. Investigative programs received 102 in Texas APS, and of those, 60,000 were confirmed to be valid. Okay? Yeah, it's a huge percentage. It's a huge percentage. So this is Region 8. This is San Antonio. There's 28 counties in this region. How many lawyers do we have for that region? One exploitation SME, one risk SME. Okay? We don't have that many workers, to tell you the truth. So, Adult Protective Services gets the power under law from the Texas Human Resources Code, Chapter 48. That's what mandates us to investigate abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Right? It requires reporting. So, you probably know that if you were to see child abuse, and most people know this, if they see child abuse, you're required under law to report that, right? Same thing is true with elder abuse. If you know or reasonably suspect, you're required to report that. Now, I have a problem all the time because a lot of the cases that I investigate are exploitation, elderly exploitation cases, so I deal with a lot of banks, okay? The banks, now some of our local banks are awesome, they're great partners with us. Some of the larger institutions, they get lost in the shuffle, right? They're supposed to report, and they're required to report if they suspect. Some of them do. Some of them have great elder fraud divisions, right? More and more are coming on to that idea. Like I just heard the other day that JP Morgan Chase established a great big elder fraud unit. So I'm like all about it. I'm like, yeah, let me come do your training. Right? So, also, Human Resources Code, Chapter 48, provides confidentiality protection for the reporter. Okay? So what that means is our caseworkers can't tell anybody who reported the case. They learn this in basic caseworker 101 training. Okay? They're not allowed to say who the reporter is. They're prohibited from that. In fact, that's a fireable offense. Right? So sometimes the clients will guess, and they'll guess right sometimes. Oh, I know who turned me in, and let them guess, that's fine. We can't confirm or deny it, we're just not going to say it, we don't even entertain those questions. Okay? So, not only are they required to report, but under Chapter 48, it provides access to records. So APS, we can get access to records. What kind of records do you think we'd be able to get?
Medical.
Yeah, medical, you know that, right? Some of y'all work in that field, and so yeah, we can get those medical records. You'd think would be prohibited because of HIPAA, but no. There's an exception for us because it's a whole protective thing, right? What other kind of records do you think are really, really private? Most people couldn't get.
Financial.
Yeah, financial records, right? So I do a lot of training, and I go out to the to the San Antonio Police Department, to the Bexar County Sheriff's Office, and I do training for them all the time. And one of the things that they are always stunned to learn is that we can get financial records and we can share it with law enforcement if we have an open case. And we're required to report issues of a criminal nature under law to law enforcement. We have to give them a notification, which is a good thing. Everybody wants that, right? Do this one. Okay. So, who's eligible for APS? Under the law, people reported are age 65 or older, or an adult aged 18 to 64 with a substantial disability. Okay? So, these are the types of alleged perpetrators and their characteristics, right? We're talking about, people who are very ethical. So the types of alleged perpetrators that we deal with Adult Protective Services are paid caretakers, unpaid caretakers, family members. The key is the ongoing relationship with the victim. So why do you think the law is written this way? Why does it have to have an ongoing relationship with the victim? Why couldn't it just be some scam artist who says, I want to replace the roof on your house, give me $5,000, wait right here, I'll be right back. That happens all the time, right? You know where it happens a lot? Down there in the south area where the Eagle Ford Shale is. Where do old people live? In the country. Yeah, what's all that land going on down there? Where those farms didn't cost, but maybe $150,000, $200,000 in the past, right? Now they're $35,000 an acre. So overnight, they're like $2.5 million for a little 100-acre farm, right? And so, predictably, perpetrators are just like roaches. You leave out some attachments here, leave a crumb trail, and they'll show up to try to see what they can get, right? So we have a huge problem with that. But that's why it has to be an ongoing relationship with the alleged victim, because they're the ones who tend to do the most damage over time, right? Because they don't just, hit it and go, right? They stay and they continue to bleed and they hurt the most. They do the most physical damage as far as physical abuse. They do the most emotional damage as far as emotional abuse. Who can wound you to the core? A stranger? No. Somebody you know, somebody you love. That's the person who can do the most emotional damage to you, right? So, this is an ongoing relationship. That's a personal relationship that includes frequent and regular interaction, reasonable assumption that the interaction is going to be continued, and an establishment of trust beyond a commercial or contractual agreement. So, here are some of the characteristics of the abusive caretakers. Sometimes they'll prevent the alleged victim from seeing or speaking with visitors. Now, some of you who are caretakers, you start seeing some red flags pop up when you try to talk to the person, to say, hey, I'm going to be by such and such a time. And this person starts alienating them, saying, yeah, we don't need your services anymore. Or they don't want to let you talk to them alone, right? I call that helicopter behavior. When they're kind of, always being a little busybody and they can't be out of ear range and they can't say anything privately to you. My suggestion to you is if you think there's something going on there probably is. Okay? Pay attention because I'm going to tell you some red flag activities to watch for. Okay? Flirtation or coyness is a possible indicator of an inappropriate sexual relationship. So that can happen when you have especially, I hate to compartmentalize, but when you have male clients, there's one thing they remember. I'm telling you, it's the one thing they remember. And so when you have a client who says, that they have a very close relationship, and they say, my other care provider lets me do this. My other care provider, I can kiss them and I can do all this kind of stuff. Okay. So why does the other care provider allow that to happen? manipulation, right? Because you're manipulating a very vulnerable client here who doesn't make good rational judgments, okay? So be suspicious of that kind of behavior because there could be a reason why this person is doing this, right? Anger, indifference, aggressive behavior toward the alleged victim. So what you'll see is that a family member or a close personal person that lives in the home will say really rude and nasty things right in front of the client. If the client tries to speak, they'll say, "Oh, psst, don't listen to her. She don't know what she's talking about." This is a person. This is a grown-up. This is an adult who deserves respect. When you see someone obviously disrespecting an adult person that they should have a good relationship with, this is a problem. Okay? Pay attention. These are all red flags of activity. So a family history of substance abuse, mental illness, criminal behavior, family violence, as you would expect, right? People don't change their stripes overnight. If you have this kind of activity in the past, chances of it occurring in the future, past predictors. Past behavior is the best predictor of future behaviors. Lack of affection toward the alleged victim. So, the allegations that get called in to Adult Protective Services to statewide intake, and you understand that our statewide intake, there is only one, and we get CPS calls at that statewide intake too. So they take CPS, APS, DADS, all kinds of calls, right? And so these are the kinds of allegations that are called in. Physical abuse, emotional and verbal abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, medical neglect, mental health neglect, and exploitation. Those are the kinds of cases that we receive. And FYI, yeah, there you go. There's my dad. When he was younger. I don't have to ask anybody permission to use that photograph, right? So the definition of physical abuse. That's any knowingly reckless or intentional act or failure act, including unreasonable confinement, corporal punishment, inappropriate or excessive force or intimidation, which caused physical injury, death, or emotional harm. Okay? So that's the definition, and it's a definition that is peculiar to adults, okay? Because it talks about including unreasonable confinement and corporal punishment, because you can't hit adults, right? You know this. There's no. I mean, what you might have been able to do to a child, with a spanking, some parents just carry that into adulthood as though they never grew up. And sometimes they have, some deficiencies and such. When they're adults, no. All of that ceases. All of that has to stop. So you know what corporal punishment is, of course. Hitting, slapping, being beaten, pushed. Inappropriate or excessive force. So sometimes there are these types of allegations that a person is pushed or shoved or manipulated, bathed, changed with unnecessary force, forced to place limbs in unnatural or painful positions. How about forced medication? Yeah, that happens. Okay? Why would somebody force somebody to take medication? Yeah, and so that's abuse as well. Right? This was a young man, 19 years old, living in a group home. And you can see the fingerprints on the arm. These are resolving fingerprints. These are scratches and such. Right here on the chest, if you can see the Z right there, that was from an insignia ring. Just, being punched in the chest. Okay? This was a young woman who literally was snatched bald. She was a heart transplant patient, and it was her sister that did that to her. So, obviously unreasonable force, right? So, unreasonable confinement, being locked in a confined area, being isolated from others, placed in restraints, or intimidation, pain, physical injury, use of harm against a loved one's, abandonment, fear of abandonment. So all you have to do is say, and these are some of our clients will tell us this, who else would take care of me? He's told me that if he leaves, who else would take care of me? And they believe that. They believe that absolutely no one else is going to step up and take care of them. Right? That's very fear-inducing. It's got a very powerful message for them, right? So, you're going to die here all alone. So, We're required to refer a case to law enforcement. The specialist has to immediately involve law enforcement if at any time during the investigation or service delivery, the APS specialist suspects allegations of abuse, neglect, or exploitation constitute a criminal offense under any law, including 22.04 of the Texas Penal Code, assault cases. So, emotional and verbal abuse. Now, you would think that this is kind of like, emotional, come on, these are adults. Emotional verbal abuse, right? This sticks and stones may break my bones, right? But you have to think about it from an elderly person's point of view, okay? Or from a disabled person. This is someone who's not really capable of defending themselves, and they're very fearful. When they're, just being in this kind of situation, you're sitting lower than me, and I'm standing up, okay? That right there is enough of an intimidation. But when I start screaming, and I get up in your face and you're not capable of defending yourself, that's a very intimidating and hostile sort of situation to be in, right? So, emotional abuse is defined as any act or use of verbal or other communication to threaten violence that makes a reasonable person fearful of imminent physical injury. So, if a client, if you're talking to a person, and if they immediately shut up when that person walks in the room, if they have a fear of the perpetrator, if they seem to have a low esteem and they seem depressed, oh, I just don't know what I would do. Oh dear, I just, woe is me all the time. If you hear a caretaker yelling, cursing, screaming, and believe me, I have some recordings that would really fry your hair. You can hear people just absolutely railing against these clients. It's just like, I wish I could be AT&T and reach out and touch someone. Threats of harm, intimidation factor, So now sexual abuse. Sexual abuse with adults is defined as non-consensual sexual activity, which may include but not limited to any of the activity would be sexually oriented offenses under the Texas Penal Code, indecent exposure, sexual assault, public indecency committed by the caretaker, a paid caretaker, a family member, a alleged victim's caretaker, another individual who has an ongoing relationship with the alleged victim. Do you think this really happens? Come on, these are adults they can call, right? Does it really happen? It really does. Okay? It does, unfortunately, all the time. And as a matter of fact, I think that they get even less media because what happens with adults that usually doesn't happen with children. They've got this added shame, especially if it's a family member. Who could I possibly tell, right? I can't, I'm too ashamed. This is my son, I'm too ashamed, right? And they have a fear because this is their caretaker. Who else would take care of them, right? So, and there are people who do go into, as caretakers, who go into this field in order to have access to elderly or disabled people. Because that's their particular building. They have a preference for their victims. And so there are those who have a preference for geriatric or disabled victims. Yeah, just trust me when I tell you, I used to be a sexual assault investigator. I'm telling you, there are those who have that particular bend in the road, and that's what attracts them, right? Well, I don't know how else to put that, right? It's their predilection, it's their preference. That's the preference of victims. And they have those who focus on those kinds of victims. So, there is no consent when the alleged perpetrator knows or should know that the alleged victim is incapable of consenting because of impairment due to mental or cognitive, emotional disease or defect. There's no consent if it's induced by fear or threat, which of course stands to reason. If they're unconscious or physically able to resist, so in other words, if they're over-medicated, right? If the alleged perpetrator has intentionally impaired the alleged victim by administering substances without the person's knowledge, or consent is coerced due to fear of retribution or hardship by exploiting the emotional dependency of the alleged victim on the alleged perpetrator. That's when they say, who else would take care of you? What would happen if I left, etc. Right? So, some of the indicators of sexual abuse. STDs, right? Unexplained pregnancy, unexplained rectal bleeding. We recently had a case out in one of our western counties where we had a 28-year-old woman who started complaining. She was barely verbal. She had, what do you call it? The disease where the brain is damaged at birth. Cerebral palsy, thank you. And she was barely verbal. Her mother could understand her, but I had a difficult time understanding her. You know, she would answer, but I really couldn't understand her, and her mother would kind of interpret for her. She said that she was having stomach pains, and her mother ended up taking her to the hospital to find out that she was 4 months pregnant. You know, and she was completely, she was severely contracted, in a wheelchair, completely, incapable. And so her turns out to be a member of her family, and he was charged and convicted. So, okay, but that's a lot of time. That was the first warning that something was going on there, was the unexplained pregnancy, unexplained rectal bleeding, of course, possible indicators. So, indicators of neglect: malnutrition, dehydration, poor hygiene, evidence of inadequate care, even when there are provider services installed. So if you have someone who has inadequate, so what happens sometimes is that a family member will actually be getting paid as the in-home care provider, but the person is completely, they have poor hygiene, they are, dehydrated, they're, disoriented, etc. They have UTIs constantly and this sort of thing. All of these things are, red flag indicators. Unsafe, unsanitary living conditions, lack of basic necessities, lack of needed equipment. They can't get around even if they wanted to. If they require a walker and their walker isn't by their bed or it isn't close by, so they are basically, immobile. Physical neglect. I'm so glad that show Hoarding came on TV. Because we know what that is, right? We know what we do with them, right? Yeah, it's medical neglect, and so that's all feces underneath your feet there, right? That's what happens when you're non-compliant diabetic. Yep. This is a 38-year-old woman that, being cared for by her mother. So, definition of exploitation, this is sort of my forte. Financial exploitation is the illegal or improper act or process of an alleged perpetrator using or attempting to use the resources of an alleged victim, including the alleged victim's social security number or other identifying information. This is the key. For monetary or personal benefit, profit, or gain without the informed consent of the alleged victim. Okay? So it's without the informed consent of the alleged victim. Okay? So, what I see most often in cases of exploitation is that I see grandchildren, I see family members, etc. come over and, I need something to buy, I got to have myself a new Corvette because after all, my pickup truck ran down, so you need to buy that for me, is that okay? Oh, sure, and they sign the check. And their defense is, but she gave me the money. Okay? So that's no defense, right? Because it's without the informed consent of the alleged victim. Can that victim give consent? And so that's the key. That's the legal key. Can they give consent, right? So, there is no informed consent when it's not voluntary, of course, when they're being forced into it, right? Or they're being intimidated, or if you don't do this, this will happen, right? Induced by deception or coercion, or given by an alleged victim whom the actor knows or should have known, to be able to make informed and rational decisions because of diminished capacity or mental disease or defect. So consider this case. We had an 86-year-old lady who had to get her knee operated on. She needed a whole knee replacement. So she goes into the bank with her care provider, and she says, I want to put her on my bank account because I need somebody to pay the bills. I wouldn't be telling you this if it had a good ending, right? Yeah. Okay. So the banker tries to talk her out of it. She says, oh man, let me talk to you by yourself. So she talks to just the customer, and the customer says, oh no, I know what I'm doing. She's been my care provider for a while, and I really want her to have access to my bank account, right? And so she says, well, all right. So they sign on, she signs on to the bank account, and of course, you know what happens, right? When the end of the day, before this care provider comes back and she gets an ATM card, probably because she needed it to buy groceries, right? And so, of course, she depletes the entire account. However, this lady has capacity. She gave it to her voluntarily. So now, what can we do about a case like that? Is that exploitation?
Induced by deception.
That's right. Induced by deception or coercion, because why did she put her on the account? Pay her bills, right? Deception or coercion, right? Because that's what the key was, right? And also you should know that when someone becomes, is on your account for the purposes supposedly of paying for your bills, they then become a fiduciary. And in the state of Texas, you have a very peculiar duty as a fiduciary in the state of Texas. You must act in the best interests of the person for whom you are a fiduciary. Right? And if you violate that, then there's a special law to prosecute you called misapplication by fiduciary. Okay? And it's pretty commonly filed. It's very easy to prove. That's why. Okay? So, that's the definition of exploitation. This was one of our cases. That was one of those, where they had a lot of money.
Exactly.
Do what?
Who has
$1.7 million.
It was a result of a lifetime of work. This lady and her husband had a private business, and they sold the business, and it was a very profitable business, and they also had oil land. And, and of course, back in the 20s, there was a bank robber, and the FBI caught him, and they said, why are you robbing banks? He said, that's where the money is. Only nowadays, that's not where the money is. Elderly people, they spent their whole life, gathering funds, and they've got it in their pension, they've got it in annuities, stocks, bonds, investments, land, right? So that's where the money is. So all you have to do is go rip off an elderly person, just like taking candy from a baby, right? So, Casey Thomas K, he's a real prince. So he was charged. So this is the house that he bought for himself with his mother's proceeds, with his grandmother's proceeds. He paid cash for that house. Yeah, and that's definitely him on that surveillance camera. And so these are the kinds of pictures that we can get, right? The kinds of surveillance stuff that we can get. He bought both of those vehicles right there, Cadillac Escalade and a Ford pickup truck with every available option is what he told me. He wanted that truck in midnight black with every available option. So when the alleged perpetrator is a paid caretaker, financial exploitation includes, but is not limited to, theft in the Texas Penal Code. So our saying is, if it's not your money, it's a crime. And that's basically it. If it's not your money, it's a crime. Right? So, let's talk about capacity to consent under the Human Resources Code 48.208. It says a person lacks the capacity to consent to receive protective services if, because of a mental or physical impairment, the person is incapable of understanding the nature of the services offered and agreeing to receive or rejecting protective services. Right? So that's the capacity to consent. And fiduciary exploitation. Now this is what I told you about being a fiduciary. If anybody asks you to be somebody else's power of attorney, think twice, 3 times, and maybe 4 times. Okay? Because you are taking on a very onerous situation. You have to be very, very careful if you are someone's power of attorney. Right? Keep separate records, keep very, very good records, keep extra good records. Right? And keep them in a safe place. Because someday, somebody like me could come knocking on your door saying, how have you been spending this person's money? Right? You better have receipts. Right? Because we have to make sure that a person's funds are spent for their benefit, not for personal benefit, profit, or gain. Because if you spend someone else's money for personal benefit, or profit, or gain, that's a definition of exploitation, right? So a fiduciary is a person who agrees to manage another person's money or property on their behalf. So a rep payee, a power of attorney, a trustee, a guardian, these are all people who can be fiduciaries. So some of the red flag indicators of exploitation is a sudden change in a bank balance or an unusual banking practice. I will tell you that there is a section in Chapter 48 that is actually titled Immunity from Liability. It says anyone who reports to the department, which is Adult Protective Services, an issue of abuse, neglect, or exploitation is immune from liability, civil and criminal, for all judicial processes in the future. Why do you think they wrote a law like that? Immunity from liability. Because they want to encourage people to report. Right? Both you and your employer are immune from liability. If you're reporting in good faith, then you're immune from liability. So, the banks have caught on to this. Right? They call us like they've been shot. Right? Boy, those and I give lessons all the time to the tellers, to the window representatives, etc., for things that they should watch for signs of exploitation. So you should know that when someone has access to someone else, consider the case of the fellow who drives up to a lady's house. She lived in Alamo Heights, beautiful old home. She had lots of money when this situation started. He pedals up on a bicycle. Yeah, that's your first clue, right? So, what did we tell you about frontal lobe impairment? Right? That's your judgment starts to go, right? Your judgment starts to go and you start getting impaired. And so, I call it her stranger danger alarm, didn't work. Right? Because normally you'd see some, any one of us would have seen this character. Trust me when I tell you. You'd have seen this character and go, oh, yeah, that's bad news right there. I would have picked him off as being a Bexar County jail customer. My children say I'm too judgmental. I don't fully accept that. In any case, he comes pedaling up on a bicycle. He strikes up a conversation. Her stranger danger alarm isn't working. So they start up this conversation. Can I fix your roof? It looks like your roof, can I water your lawn? How about I do this? He starts coming back day after day. Well, before long, she's got nobody. She has a niece who lives in Austin, right? But she's 100 miles away or so, and so, the niece calls up, how you doing, Annie? Oh, fine. So that's all she hears. So before long, this guy moves in and he takes over her life. So, not only does he start taking over the money, of course, all right? So he starts cashing out CDs, right? Because think of anything in an elderly person's life that's worth money. What is it? Life insurance, right? Sometimes that has cash value. CDs being cashed ahead of maturity. Because they don't care when they mature, they're worth money today. Right? So let's go ahead and cash that out. What else is worth money that they have? Jewelry, yeah. You had pawn slips all over the house. What else is worth money? Yep. Silver, any kind of possessions, right? Pawn slips all over the house. So, and anything else, like he forged documents on her annuities, wanting cash value for her annuities, instead of the monthly payments, etc. So, when you're talking to a bank, you have to understand that banks call them different LOBs. Those are lines of business. Right? So a bank could have savings, they have checking, they have insurance sometimes, like USAA, right? They have mortgages, they have investments, CDs, stocks, bonds, annuities, different kinds. If somebody wins the lottery, for example, they could get it all paid out, or they could get it in an annuity and get it so often, right? So all of these things are different lines of business where the banks are concerned. So consider when we're trying to do an investigation, we need to get records from all of those different lines of business. And it's as if you're talking to different companies, right? Because the mortgage section doesn't talk to the loan section, doesn't talk to the credit section, doesn't talk to the annuities division, doesn't talk to investments, doesn't talk to savings, checking, etc. So they're all different lines of business. It just makes our lives interesting.
It makes it their job easier to get it.
Because they have access to everything in the house.
And nobody questions it, like you said.
Exactly. Right? So when we found her, she had had her commissary picture. Her husband was military. She had had her commissary picture taken in January, and she was this plump little rosy-cheeked lady of about 160 pounds, very sweet looking. By the time we found her, she weighed about 80 pounds. The closest thing to her was a glass of wine on a nightstand, and so really and truly saved her life. That's the caseworker did that. Hats off to the caseworkers. They save people's lives all the time. Anyway, so multiple withdrawal of funds of an ATM card through online transfers or payments, because that's another red flag activity. You see online transfers in a bank statement, that naturally means that you need a computer, right? So I tell the caseworkers, never trust anything that they tell you. Never trust, I say never trust anything. If your mother tells you she loves you, ask for proof. I'm an investigator, I want to know, right? So you see these online transactions. If an investigator points to an online transaction and says, did you have this transaction? The woman's going to say, oh yeah, really? Where's your computer? Show me how you turn it on. There's a challenge, right? Show me how you access your bank records. Not so good, right? So that's one of our little tricks that we use. So unexplained missing funds and valuables, of course. Who often finds those things that are missing? That discovers things that are missing? Family members. A lot of times, they'll keep their jewelry in a special place, and maybe it's the point in their lives where they're attending a lot of funerals, right? They go to get their good jewelry out, and it's missing. Victim has unpaid bills, disconnected utilities, despite having enough income, or auto pay. So a lot of family members will set up their families on auto pay, right? For the water, for the electricity, etc. And so if the electricity gets shut off, what does that tell you? It hadn't been paid, right? A lot of people, will say, well, it's because you forgot to pay the bill. No. If it's on auto pay, what does that tell you? There's no money in the bank. That's right. So why is there no money in the bank? Right? That's what you need to be asking. So, I don't know if we can do that. Can we? Can you double click on that? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. That was Mickey Rooney. You can look at it on YouTube. It's available. He talks about getting embezzled by his son, and it being a member of the family, and how terribly devastating that was, and how it just he never saw it coming, and he trusted his son, and it was bad. Anyway, so what do we do when others are victimizing the elderly? That's all right. What do we do when others are victimizing the elderly disabled? So the things that we're not going to investigate are things that professionals hired by the alleged victim. For example, the roofers, or the people who say, don't you need a new driveway, and this sort of thing. Scam, con artists, that sort of thing. That's a law enforcement only kind of issue. Telemarketers, internet scammers, con artists, neighbors, disreputable repairmen. Okay. So anybody who doesn't have an ongoing relationship with the person really is out of our depth. It's not what we do. Okay. So some of the behavioral indicators of alleged victims. All of these things are behavior indicators: fear, anxiety, anger, confusion, withdrawal, depression. So the lady that you saw, Casey K, 1.7 million, he ripped off from her. The bank was telling me, she called me up one day. She says, "Oh my God, Virginia, they're coming to the bank right now. Can you come?" Okay. So I meet them in the basement of the lobby, right in Frost Bank, and we sit down there, and we start explaining to her with her good granddaughter, start explaining to her all of this money that has been taken out of her bank account, etc., to the tune of 1.7 million. And what her reaction is? What would your reaction be?
She banged.
Open the gates, I'm coming in, right? That would be my reaction, right? And then anger, fear. She went, oh, he shouldn't have done that. That was That was my first indicator of what? Yeah, cognitive deficiencies, lack of capacity. Yeah, because she just didn't have an appropriate reaction at all. She failed to see how those two things connected. You know, if I don't have money, then I can't, you know, pay my bills, I can't buy food, etc. She just didn't see any, you know, line here between them. So, non-responsiveness, resignation, ambivalence, detachment, etc. So, APS clients, getting back to the ethics lead, they have a right to refuse to cooperate with the investigation. It does not mean our investigation is going to stop, right? We'll do everything else we can do. We'll talk to friends, we'll talk to neighbors, we'll talk to family members, we'll talk to the bank, we'll talk to the doctors, we'll talk to whoever we can to try to piece together a picture of what's going on. But they can refuse protective services. They have a right to select the least restrictive alternatives. They have a right to refuse medical treatment, and they're free to decline their services unless they're in a state of abuse, neglect, or exploitation that threatens their life or physical safety. Okay? So, statutory authority, I told you it's Chapter 48 of the Texas Human Resources Code. These are all the legal interventions. Our lawyer here would be better able to tell you this. Access to records, court-authorized entry. Sometimes we need to, you know, they're blocking us and they won't allow us to see the client and they're just refusing. And sometimes we can get a court order to, you know, to be able to see the client, just to ascertain that they're okay. Interference with investigation and protective services, emergency order protective services, and family violence protective orders. So this is the access to records or documents that we talked about earlier, so I won't spend too much time on it. Basically, it just says that any kind of records that we need for our investigation, we can get, basically. I've gotten everything from car titles to mortgage loans to, you know, you name it. I've gotten all kinds of records. So, family violence protectors, guardianship, mental health commitments. Okay, so our goal is client safety, of course. That's number one, right? Client safety. We do a comprehensive risk assessment. The high risk and a refusal to services may need a need for capacity assessment. We need to involve the community to protect those at risk, right? So we need to try to get out and do community presentations. We have staff members that's what they do. That's all they do. So, that's our 1-800 reporting line. And anybody can call that, and we urge you to do so. As long as you're making a report in good faith, you know, then you're our hero. Okay? Anybody else have any questions? Shoot.
When I used to work in the home health, we had to call sometimes APS. Sometimes we would talk to the families. I mean, I know you say you can be anonymous, but sometimes in some situations, we knew that y'all would be able to help, and we shared with them because we were worried they were going to refuse you. So sometimes that's telling them, you know, there's ways they can help.
She's saying that she's communicating with the client that they're going to be making an APS report.
Right.
So that the client will know that APS is coming and that they should let us in.
Yeah, so that they don't refuse you, because we knew that some of these knew that they may do that.
There's certainly nothing that prohibits you from telling the client. There is no law that says that you can't tell the client, hey, I've called this in. You certainly, the law just says that we as APS can't say who it is that made the report. If you wish as the reporter to tell the client, there's nothing that says that you can't do
We just found that we could get more of them to accept
that.
y'all
Makes sense to
when
me.
the door came
Yeah, she
in.
says you can, did everybody hear that? She found that sometimes they could, if they talk to the client and kind of warn the client, look, I've told APS, and APS is going to be coming out here to talk to you, that they would get more we would get more cooperation with the client, and the client felt more prepared to see this stranger and to talk about things that they normally wouldn't with a stranger because of the report that was made. I got that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes,
I have
ma'am.
a quick question.
Sure.
Is it true that you all close cases when the patient goes on the hospice care?
Is it true that we what?
Close cases when the patient goes on the hospice care?
I'm going to let Sonia answer that one. Our risk committee.
There's no rule that says we close our cases when we've completed working our service plan and the client, we have a long-term resolution to the underlying problem. So if If the issue had to do with getting hospice services, we may at times close, but no, you should not be told that. And I don't know if your slide has all our numbers at the end, but
It was actually an APS
I don't think
caseworker
there's-
who told me that.
that's what I'm saying.
This
You
is
should not
my
be being told that.
information right
That's
here.
not true. That is not a reason why we would close a case because
Ma'am,
someone's on
yeah.
hospice.
I used to work for hospice, and we made APS reports sometimes.
Okay, good. She said she used to work for hospice and she would make APS reports, so I know that we get them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we get
It's
them.
not a reason not to call APS, and it's certainly not a reason why we would close a case. There should be a different type of a resolution we solve by involving hospice.
And of course, the first thing we're looking for is client safety. Are they safe? Are they going to continue to be safe? Ma'am? What if question? I love that. What if cows had wings? We'd all wear helmets. What if you have a mentally ill person who won't stay on their medications? What are our resources to deal with that?
The mental health authority in whatever county the individual resides. Adult Protective Services is limited. We get referrals on individuals with mental health diagnoses that are non-compliant, but we're limited. What we rely on are the mental health authorities. They really are the experts, and that's who we involve. And in fact, a lot of the times what we will do is advise people to contact, like in Bear County, it's the Center for Healthcare Services. They really are the experts. You do not have to involve APS because someone with a mental illness is not taking their medications. If they're a danger to themselves or others, Virginia can explain about CIT. It's not that we don't intervene, it's just we're probably not the best choice to intervene.
So Bear County has got a CIT team, a crisis intervention team. Okay, I am on the team from Bear County for APS. A lot of the other counties are starting them up right now. Crisis intervention teams are generally, they're headed up by either SAPD or Bear County Sheriff's Office. They each have their own CIT teams, and they will respond to mental health emergencies.
So on a consistent basis, they call those, they're not.
Well, they have to. They have to. I mean, I'm talking about CIT will respond in a law enforcement situation if you have a crisis, if you have an emergency or a crisis. And what they will do, there is a statute in the law that talks about emergency detention, that they can take custody of a person and take them downtown to a mental health facility for emergency detention for up to 3 days so that they can be evaluated and see, and basically, put back on track or put into a facility that's suitable for their needs. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I said against the person's what?
Against the person's will, police officers can do that. If you understand, it has to be under very stringent circumstances. They have to be a clear and present danger to themselves or others.
This is kind of a tie-in to the CTI, is that what you said?
CIT, Crisis Intervention Team.
Okay, what if that person has, say, dementia or Alzheimer's, they're living by themselves and they're not taking their medication? What resources are available?
Well, so that's what we do. That's what our investigations do. Okay, when we go in, we do a complete assessment.
Even
Right.
if the client doesn't allow you, let's say you knock on the door and you say, I'm with whoever, and they won't unlock the door, they won't let you in, they refuse to see anybody.
Well, if that's the case, we have, if it's an emergency situation, we could do an emergency order of protective services. We could go ahead, Lisa. I want Lisa to answer this one.
Okay.
With the legalities, we can.
I volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association. A lot of times we get calls in, and we really, we tell them to contact, either ACOG or the Area Agency on Aging, because we really don't know the legalities of do they
Right.
go to APS or, so that's why
I mean, you can definitely call them into us. It's the same thing that Virginia was talking about earlier. Is we're still going to complete the investigation, even if our alleged victim, our client, is not cooperative. That's fine. They don't have to cooperate, but we're going to talk to medical professionals, family members. We're going to try and figure out what that person needs, and can we meet those needs in the less restrictive alternative. Worst case scenario, if they're so cognitively impaired that they lack capacity under all the various legal definitions, and their life's in danger, then we'll go to the courts and get an order, and that's, that's what I do.
And remember too, that a lot of times we have a history on these people, and so we kind of know something about them. We know who their physicians are, and we know who their family members are, and so, sometimes we have some information we can get.
Great, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Anybody else? No? Good? All done, all through?
All right, thank you so much. Thank you very much. She saved the day. Okay, so thank you so much for attending today, the whole day. There's a piece of paperwork that I need from you if you're getting credit. Statement of attendance form, the participant profile form, and the DVD order form if you want a copy of today's presentations and videotape photos. So, again, if you have any questions for me, you have my email address. I'll be sure to answer them as quickly as possible. I'll see what I can do for today's credit and for today's ethics credits, and of course for the nursing credits. And again, thank you so much, Michelle Garza, for the treat this morning. Be sure to drive safe, take care, and if you need any help exiting the building, you want to have APS personnel direct you in the right direction. So please drop off your own forms. Drop off your own forms. Don't drop off your partner's forms or your neighbor's forms. Drop off your own individual forms. Get them right here on the desk. DVD. That's it from Howell. Thank you.